This short Metropolitan Police Revision Guide will cover the basic legislation concerning theft, Section 1, Theft Act 1968. You should use this resource to help your understanding, along with other learning materials such as the Blackstone's Handbook for Policing Students. The presentation will provide you with a breakdown of the elements within the legislation. It will also show some basic examples of offences to aid in your revision. Objectives. By the end of this video, you should be able to define the offence of theft, give examples of dishonesty, appropriates, property, belonging to another, and intent to permanently deprive, all in relation to theft. You will also be able to identify the points to prove and know the power of arrest for theft. The majority of crimes committed in the Metropolitan Police District are against the Theft Acts 1968 and 1978. You know what theft is, even if you are not aware of its definition under the Act of 1968. In most cases, if you think theft has been committed, you will probably be right. The definition of theft. A person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. There are two elements you must consider when dealing with this type of crime. The first one is the act or the actions of the person. The second is what he intended to do before or after his act or action. Let's have a look at these two elements in an example. Nick and Mandy. You can see they have both done the same thing. They've picked up a mobile phone which they have found in the street. This completes the act or action. But what was their intention? Nick, I'll take it to the police station. Mandy, I've been looking for one of these for ages. I'll keep this. Can you see Nick has no dishonest intention, but the same can't be said about Mandy? The only difference in what they've done is in their intentions. We'll look at this instance again at a later stage to see what difference this makes to the possibility of an offence. As we saw in the definition of theft, there are points which need to be present and proved in order to establish an offence of theft. So what are these points to prove? Dishonesty, appropriates, property, belonging to another, and finally with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. Let's examine this in more detail by putting them under the two main headings of act and intention. The act appropriates property belonging to another. The intention, dishonesty, with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. Okay, let's have a look at what these mean. Appropriates, defined as any assumption by a person of the right of an owner. This simply means that a person who treats property as if it was their own to do what they like with it. It would also include a person who comes across some property innocently but later assumes the rights of the ownership. For instance, a person goes into the local library and gets a book out to read. It is obvious that no crime has been committed at this stage. Later, the person decides to keep it and not return the book to the library. Now they are appropriating it because they are treating it as their own property. Property. The definition of property is somewhat technical, but it is important that you know some of the rules. Most property you will deal with will be cars, TVs, stereos, jewellery, cash, cheques, bank cards and the like. Broadly speaking, property which can be touched or handled, known as being tangible, can be stolen. Land cannot be stolen. However, land could be stolen if it is dug up and removed without authority. Belonging to another. The first thing to remember is that unless property has an owner, it cannot be stolen. So if the owner of property throws it away, abandons it, or gives up his right to it, it cannot be stolen by anyone who takes it into his possession. Property will always belong to its owner. The Theft Act states that property is regarded as belonging to any person having possession or control of it, or having it in a proprietary right or interest. Let's apply the first 3 elements to lesson notes you may be given during your recruits course. When you receive the notes, they now belong to you, you possess them. They also belong to the curriculum design team because they control them. They can withdraw them or alter them at any time. They also belong to the commissioner because he owns them. He has property rights or interest. Whilst on the subject of ownership, let's look at plants, shrubs, etc. Cultivated plants can be stolen. This does not apply to plants and mushrooms growing wild unless picked for commercial gain. Then it could be theft. Are animals property? Animals belonging to someone, whether or not tamed, can be stolen. This doesn't apply to wild animals, fish or birds unless kept in captivity. Dishonesty. The law takes the word dishonesty in its everyday meaning. Think back to the scenario of Nick and Mandy we mentioned at the beginning of this video. It was easy to decide who was dishonest in that example. The Theft Act 1968 gives some examples of what is not dishonest. They can be summarised by saying that an appropriation by a person will not be dishonest if it is done in the belief, genuinely held, that they had a legal right to do so for themselves or another. The person would have consented if they had known the circumstances, and the person to whom it belonged could not be found by taking reasonable steps. The test of dishonesty, as laid down by the courts, has 2 elements to it. Firstly, could the defendant's conduct be regarded as dishonest according to the ordinary standards of reasonable, decent person? If no, that is the end of the matter. If yes, the next point applies. Was the defendant aware their actions were, according to those ordinary standards, dishonest? Now, let's look at what another part of the Theft Act says. A person's appropriation of property belonging to another may be dishonest, notwithstanding that he or she is willing to pay for it. Note the word may rather than will in this definition. Now, consider the incident. John says to Gary, "I'll give you £25 for your cup final ticket." Gary says no, as he wants to keep the ticket so he can see the game. Later on, when Gary has gone out, John sees Gary's ticket on the table in the kitchen. He takes the ticket and leaves £50 for it. The ticket holder refused to sell the ticket. The other man took the ticket and left £50. Could the man who took the ticket convince the court that the other man consented to the ticket being taken? Now consider this situation. Peter goes up to a milk float. As there is no one about, he takes a bottle of milk from one of the trays and thinks to himself, "I'll leave the money for the pint, that will be okay." Did the milkman have a spare pint to sell? Did the man genuinely believe that the milkman would have consented? Would the man's actions pass the dishonesty test? How would the suspect's actions stand up to the 2 points mentioned earlier with regard to dishonesty? Intent to permanently deprive. Often the evidence of this is quite clear. The thief may deprive the other by keeping it, eating it or drinking it, selling it, burning, breaking or destroying it, throwing it away, or leaving it where the loser is unlikely to recover it. Or, less obviously, where the thief may actually want the owner to have the property back, but only if he pays for it. For example, A thief steals jewellery with the intention of returning it to the owner, but only if a reward is paid. The law holds that this is an intent to permanently deprive, because if the reward was refused, the jewellery would not be returned. Investigating theft. Although all offences of theft are contrary to the Theft Act, each differs from the others in the circumstances of the offences. You must first establish, is it theft? And if it is, who committed it? You must investigate each allegation of theft thoroughly before deciding which course of action is appropriate. There are 3 elements of theft. You must make sure that the 3 elements of theft are established, namely, there was some property in existence which belonged to some person, i.e. who had ownership, possession or control, and that person no longer has possession or control of the property, and the accused may be reasonably suspected of having stolen it. Remember the elements in the definition of theft. Property was in existence, it belonged to another, it was appropriated, the appropriation was dishonest. There was an intention to permanently deprive the owner of it. If one of these elements is missing, you will not be able to prove the offence of theft. Whilst on the subject of investigating theft, it is important to keep the following in mind. Be aware that there are some people who mislay an item of property and then allege it has been stolen. When trying to establish that the property existed, you must make sure the complainant had the property immediately before the alleged theft. This factor may need confirming by a witness or witnesses. To confirm that the property has gone, carry out a thorough search of the area where the property may have been prior to its disappearance. Could it be that someone has borrowed the property or innocently moved it? Obtain a detailed description of the property from the owner. Always check as to whether the complainant is willing to assist prosecuting the thief should he be arrested. If the complainant is unable or unwilling to assist police in prosecuting the thief, always seek the advice of a supervising officer before going any further in the investigation. If you decide to arrest, the arrest must be necessary. Powers of arrest come from Section 24, Police and Criminal Evidence Act, 1984. You should now understand how a person who appropriates property can be guilty of theft. If the thief willingly parts with the stolen property to another person, the person receiving it would not himself have appropriated it and therefore would not be guilty of theft. However, if he knew or had reason to believe that the property had been stolen, he could be guilty of another offence under the Theft Act 1968 called dishonest handling of stolen goods, commonly called receiving. You will learn about this offence at a later stage in your training, so don't concern yourself with it now. Thank you for watching this Metropolitan Police Revision Guide on theft. More information can be found in your Blackstone manual. If you think you've missed anything in this video, then please feel free to replay whenever you like. If you have noticed that part of this video is out of date due to changes in the law, then please contact the Curriculum Design team via the Aware mailbox.